Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're exploring a really fascinating tension right at the heart of modern British identity. If you look around the United Kingdom, Christianity is literally everywhere. It's in the architecture, the institutions, even the language. Yet the demographic data tells a radically different story, one of an increasingly secular modern reality. So what's really going on here? Are we looking at a deeply Christian nation or a secular society just living inside a historic Christian shell? Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to imagine a tourist visiting the UK for the very first time. They've seen the royal weddings on TV, right? Maybe they've read some Shakespeare or C.S. Lewis before their trip. When they actually get here and observe the visible cultural landscape, what would they conclude about the importance of Christianity in Britain? Based on what they see with their own two eyes, they probably think it's the absolute center of British life. And honestly, you couldn't blame them. To figure this out, we're going to look through 4 different lenses today. First, the Christian cultural surface. Second, a reality check by the numbers. Third, the faith school debate. And finally, symbols and shifting laws. Section 1, the Christian cultural surface. Think about what our tourist actually sees. They visit cathedrals that have hosted continuous worship for nearly 1,000 years. They see church buildings in literally every town and village. But actually, scratch that. It goes way deeper than just architecture. The King James Bible and the Book of Common Prayer fundamentally shaped the English language we speak every single day. In literature, heavyweights like J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis embedded deep Christian themes into Narnia and Middle-earth, and even J.K. Rowling drew on the Christian Gospels for the finale of Harry Potter. Politically, the Church of England is baked right into the system. There are 26 bishops sitting in the House of Lords directly voting on national laws. That is an incredible cultural footprint. And in some regions, up to 30% of all schools still have explicit Christian affiliations. So on the surface, the historical and cultural influence is absolutely massive. Section 2, the reality check. Let's look at the numbers. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how traditional religious identity is completely fragmenting. An ORB survey commissioned by the BBC asked people how they actually identify themselves. Only 27% called themselves a religious person. The largest group, at 31%, identified as a spiritual person. Meanwhile, 21% said they were not religious, and 18% identified as agnostic or convinced atheists. So while a massive chunk of the population still holds spiritual beliefs, those beliefs are rapidly detaching from traditional Christian doctrines or formal institutions. And that detachment leads us to this incredibly stark number, less than 2%. That is the percentage of the population that actually attends Church of England services on a weekly basis. Even if you look at all Christian denominations combined, estimates put weekly attendance at less than 5%. So we've got this dramatic contrast, a country where bishops sit in parliament and ancient churches anchor every town, yet the pews inside, well, they're largely empty on a Sunday morning. You can see this shifting tide even more clearly when you look at traditional Christian rites of passage. Historically, almost everyone marked the major milestones of life in a church. But just look at this collapse over a few generations. In 1950, 67% of the population were baptized in the Church of England. By 2011, that number had plummeted to just 12%. Marriages show a similar trend, dropping from 72% being conducted in churches in 1957 down to around 36% by the year 2000. And this whole demographic transformation is summarized brilliantly by this ratio, 12-1. According to the British Social Attitude Survey, for every single convert the Church of England currently brings in, it loses 12 people, primarily through death. It is a demographic reality that is shrinking the traditional church at a very rapid pace. All of this has led to a massive rise in people identifying with no religion, especially among 18 to 24-year-olds, where they make up 60% of the demographic. But we need to be careful with how we interpret this. Sociologist Linda Woodhead's research shows that no religion doesn't necessarily equal militant atheism. Less than half of this group are convinced atheists. Only 13.5% are actually hostile to public worship. Many of them respect religious leaders like the Pope or the Dalai Lama, and about a quarter even engage in some monthly spiritual practice like praying. Why does this matter to us? Well, it means the average person you meet isn't necessarily hostile to faith. They are just entirely disconnected from its institutions, which fundamentally changes our community dynamics. Section 3, the faith school debate. As society shifts, the education system has become one of the first modern battlegrounds where this demographic friction really becomes visible. On one side, supporters of faith schools point to some major advantages. They argue these schools offer high academic standards, provide a strong ethical grounding based on values like tolerance and justice, and add vital diversity to the educational landscape. However,
Organizations like the British Humanist Association raise strong objections. They argue that state-funded faith schools create segregation in a diverse society. They also raise concerns about inclusivity, both for staff and students who don't share the faith, and worry that religious education in these schools can be heavily biased, sometimes instructing in doctrine rather than offering an objective view of all worldviews.
And this brilliantly illustrates the modern paradox of these schools. When sociologist Linda Woodhead studied why parents actually choose to send their kids to faith schools, the results were incredibly revealing. 77% of parents chose them for academic standards, 58% chose them for location, 41% for discipline, and the desire to actually transmit beliefs about God, a tiny 3%. It perfectly captures how a Christian institution is highly valued by the public, but primarily for its practical secular benefits rather than its religious ones.
Section 4. Symbols and Shifting Laws.
A perfect example of clashes in the public sphere happened back in 2015. The Church of England produced a short advertisement featuring various people from weightlifters to refugees reciting the Lord's Prayer. They intended to show it in cinemas right before the new Star Wars movie, but the agency managing cinema ads actually banned it. Why? Because they feared a religious message could offend people of differing faiths or no faith. It caused a huge public outcry, even from non-religious public figures. It really forces us to ask, does this ban reflect decreasing Christian influence or just extreme modern corporate caution? We also see this tension defining modern religious freedom in the workplace. Take the case of Nadia Oweda, a British Airways employee who was suspended for refusing to cover her crucifix. She took her case all the way to the European Court of Human Rights and won. The court ruled the domestic authorities had failed sufficiently to protect the applicant's right to manifest her religion, especially since her discreet cross didn't harm the company's image. It was a major victory establishing limits on how far secular corporate policies can actually restrict personal faith. But the courts have also ruled against traditional religious expressions when they clash with modern equality laws. In 2008, the Christian owners of the Bull B&B refused a room to a same-sex couple based on their religious beliefs. The courts ruled against the B&B owners, finding their actions unlawful. What's truly fascinating here is how rapidly the Christian demographic itself has changed on this issue. In 1989, 70 to 80% of Christians opposed same-sex marriage. By 2014, that number had plummeted to under 30%. Many Christians have reinterpreted their beliefs to support acceptance. So the B&B case reflects a changing societal attitude where traditional conservative Christian views are increasingly in the minority, even among Christians themselves.
Section 5. A secular shift or a changing faith.
So clearly, secularization is happening. The undeniable drop in attendance and traditional rituals shows a society moving away from religious institutions. But many sociologists argue that religion isn't necessarily dying, it's just shifting. It's moving from being a cultural duty or obligation to being an active personal choice. Just look at modern Christian initiatives like the Street Pastor movement, where thousands of volunteers go out into urban centers on weekend nights simply to care for and help vulnerable people. It's practical, it's modern, and it brings a deeply human element into our communities that is fundamentally rooted in traditional belief.
So, what does this all mean? We are left with a pretty complex reality. The pews may be emptying, and personal identity is becoming increasingly secular. Yet the language, the laws, the schools, and the entire cultural landscape remain deeply imprinted by centuries of faith. Can a modern society be both heavily secular and fundamentally shaped by Christian heritage? Or is that cultural footprint just a fading echo of the past? That is the fascinating paradox at the heart of this explainer, and I'll leave it to you to decide. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning the world around you.